Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schatz.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight.
We're back, we're ready, and why not Chicago?
Leaders pitch Chicago to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention. But was the pitch overshadowed by party infighting?
A city council exodus. We talk with 4 alderpeople about their decision to leave office.
Indiana is the latest of Illinois' neighbors to be a battleground for abortion rights. We hear from some of that state's lawmakers.
A new proposal to upgrade Soldier Field. Can it really sway the Bears to stay?
The Art Institute's famed lions are back on view after being cleaned. But how did the iconic structures come to be in Chicago? Find out in Ask Jeffrey.
And we check in with Walt Whitman and the Soul Children of Chicago ahead of their big anniversary concert.
But first, some of today's top stories. Federal legislation targeting straw purchases of guns is introduced nearly a year after Chicago police officer Ella French was fatally shot with such a weapon. Senator Dick Durbin, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, titled the measure the Officer Ella Grace French Task Force Support Act to honor French's memory.
Today I'm announcing a new bill which would provide funding to multi-jurisdictional task forces that investigate and disrupt straw purchasing and illegal firearms trafficking. With the gracious permission of her family, the bill will be named after Officer French.
Durbin says the bill will help keep firearms out of the hands of prohibited users. More on the story on our website. Chicago's opening an employment center specifically to help people with disabilities. The Career Center is located on the near west side on Ogden Avenue. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced the launch of the new center on the 32nd anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In a statement, Lightfoot says, "We are making this landmark investment to ensure that people with disabilities all over the city will have the support they need to access job and career opportunities." Former Governor Pat Quinn wants to ensure that any Soldier Field makeover does not include a naming rights deal. Quinn has filed an ordinance with the city clerk as a private citizen asking for a citywide referendum on protecting the name of Soldier Field. The stadium was named Soldier Field in 1925 in memory of American soldiers killed in World War I.
I'm a lifelong Chicago Bears fan, but we have to understand the first most important principles in our society is when we dedicate something to the memory of service members who gave their last full measure of devotion to our democracy, we don't change the name. We don't attach a corporate name to the name Soldier Field.
Quinn's action comes one day after Mayor Lightfoot proposed a $2 billion plan to keep the Bears at a renovated and domed Soldier Field. We'll have much more on that story coming up later in the program. But first, Chicago officials make their bid to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention, so stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago is pulling out all the stops to convince Democratic Party leaders to pick the city to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Here's Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
We're ready for our close-up. This is a great global city, and this is a place where we are going to be not only uniting Chicago and Illinois, but we have the opportunity to really ignite the entire Midwest. This is a real opportunity to go right at the heartland. And, you know, my view is you win the heartland, you win the election.
But as it goes with many parties, including the Democratic Party, sometimes drama steals the show. And here to talk about all that and more is WTTW news reporter Heather Sharon. So Heather, Mayor Lightfoot made this pitch a while back with a very slickly produced campaign-style video. Tell us about the significance of today's event and where it was held.
Well, this was really Chicago's chance to wine and dine the leaders of the Democratic National Committee, show them the venues that they're pitching to hold for the convention, and basically to make their case that Chicago, as the mayor said today, is the only choice. Now, they did this in a gleaming new development in the Fulton Market District, which is part of the West Loop that really sprung into life after the 1996 Democratic National Convention took place, mostly at the United Center, kicking off a wave of redevelopment into the West Loop of today that we know, with trendy restaurants and cool boutiques. And the mayor said that is an indication of what a convention can do for Chicago in 2024.
And Democratic National Committee Chair Jamie Harrison was there at this event today. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
We are looking for a turnkey operation. I want the attention 100% to be on Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Democratic Party, and we are going to put on the best show that we have ever put on, ever in the history of Democratic conventions.
All right, we're going to get into where the attention is right now, but what advantages does the city of Chicago have in hosting the DNC, as we hear that Milwaukee might or will get the RNC?
Well, so the issue in Chicago is that it is a living, breathing commercial for what the Democrats we heard today say were the values of the party: diversity, inclusion, equity, and opportunity. Chicago is a deep blue city in a deep blue state in the increasingly red Midwest. And while Illinois might not be a swing state, Wisconsin and Michigan certainly are, and coverage of the convention in Chicago will reach people in those states. We asked Jamie Harrison about that. Why not held it in a swing state? And they just might. Houston, Atlanta, and New York City are the other three finalists.
New York City is certainly not in a swing state, but it has been typical for both of these party conventions to be in swing states, at least in recent history. So what are the next steps here in this process?
Well, now that the city has made their case, they are waiting with, I'm sure, bated breath for the Democratic National Committee to make their choice. And the stakes are pretty high because, of course, everybody thinks of Chicago and Democratic National Conventions. They think of 1968. They think of 1996. So Chicago still has a little bit of a chip on its shoulder to prove they can handle conventions.
And, of course, this comes with a little bit of drama, as we alluded to. There's some palace intrigue in the Illinois Democratic Party. It's been well publicized now that Governor J.B. Pritzker wants to oust the current chair of the Illinois Democratic Party, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Here is the governor on that.
I have a lot of respect for Congresswoman Kelly and support her in many ways. It's just we need to reconfigure the way the leadership is.
It got a little awkward there because the two of them were standing side by side at this press conference. This is an internecine battle here that's brewing, Heather. Remind us the backstory.
Well, Governor J.B. Pritzker did not back Robin Kelly when she was elected to lead the Illinois Democratic Party after Michael Madigan resigned in disgrace back in March of 2021. Now he wants to put Lisa Hernandez, a state rep from Cicero, in that spot. And he says it's because as a federal elected official, Robin Kelly cannot raise money for state candidates because she's governed by very strict federal rules. Now, Robin Kelly says that's not an issue. They've created a separate committee. They've gotten a ruling from the Federal Election Commission, and everything is moving along like plans. She says that she feels confident about the vote that will take place on Saturday, but it is turning into a real test of the governor's political muscle. And of course, as you know, Paris, he is by far the largest donor to the Illinois Democratic Party. So we'll see if he gets his way in this contest.
There's no doubt about that. And it's kind of a battle all over because we learned today that the AFL-CIO is endorsing a power sharing agreement here. So we'll see how this all turns out. All right, Heather, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. You could call it a Hail Mary, or rather a Hail Lori. It's an attempt to keep the Bears from moving to Arlington Heights. Yesterday, Mayor Lightfoot and city officials unveiled proposals to put a roof on Soldier Field and thoroughly modernize the facility to meet the demands of today's NFL. The improvements could cost upwards of $2.2 billion. This as the city has 10 years and $640 million to go paying off that 2002 rehab. The biggest question of all here, are the Bears even listening? Here with more is Mark Gannis, president of sports business consulting firm Sports Corp. He's also a sports facility specialist and worked on the sale of the Cubs from the Tribune Company to the Ricketts family, among many other projects. We also invited a representative from the city to talk about this proposal, but they declined to join us tonight. Mark, we're glad to see you again. So the million-dollar question here, could one of these plans, especially the one with the roof on top, convince the Bears to stay at Soldier Field?
Highly unlikely. This is it's a 100-year-old building, Paris. This will be at least the third major renovation that, at least that's what the plan is, and that's not really going to cut it. If there was a meaningful effort to keep the Bears in Chicago, it should have included a new stadium on a piece of land with the Bears having control over their own destiny in the building. This is just, unfortunately, more of the same with a few tweaks here, some control there, maybe a naming rights deal if Mr. Quinn doesn't get his way, as we just heard. It's just not the right plan, and it's not in the right location. And certainly nobody's even talked about how the proposed $2.2 billion project would even be paid for.
If it's even going to cost that, because we know that these projects tend to overrun their costs a little bit. So aside from keeping the Bears, is it feasible? You kind of answered that, but I mean, to put a dome on Soldier Field, is it worth it to do all this if the Bears aren't going to be there?
Oh, absolutely not. It makes no sense. If the Bears aren't going to be there, it makes no sense to put meaningful money into Soldier Field. Certainly, it could be a lovely soccer facility. The owner of the Chicago Fire is one of the wealthiest people in the world. If they wanted to give him a lease to play there long term, I'm sure he could be talked into sharing the cost of some modest renovations. What may make sense is everything else that's been discussed in the third option, which is to make the museum campus more integral, have more activity, have it be easier to get to, increase the infrastructure. But to do this because of in an effort to try and retain the Bears, it's too little, it's too late, and it really doesn't make sense.
Is there any sense, though, you know, I mean, it seems like this is big, this deal in Arlington Heights, but it'd be really expensive for the Bears to fund this. Is that maybe tell you that there is a chance that they would stay at Soldier Field if this gets too costly in Arlington Heights?
That's certainly the hope, to create Soldier Field and a remodeled Soldier Field as a more financially less costly option. And let's not forget that the McCaskey family that owns the Bears is not at the upper echelon in wealth in the National Football League. But the NFL over the last 25 years has developed many ways of financing a new stadium in markets far smaller than Chicago. The NFL participates, the NFL Players Association participates, and the team will put up some money, and of course the fans will, in the form of seat licenses and things of that nature. So there are ways to do this reasonably, and probably cost in the $2.5 billion range. And they're going to have a lot of additional land at Arlington Park to be able to offset some of the cost of constructing and operating the stadium.
So you know all these folks. Do the powers that be in the NFL, would they prefer the Bears to build that Arlington Heights stadium or to stay at Soldier Field?
If those are the two options, the answer is to go to Arlington Heights, into a new stadium that the Bears design, own, and control. There was an opportunity to do something much more meaningful, which is to talk about building a new stadium somewhere within the city limits of Chicago with meaningful public sector participation in the project. But they chose to go in a different direction. Understandable. It is an election year also, let's not forget that. So the toxic relationship of landlord and tenant that the Bears have had with the Park District, they're trying to sweep that to the side. But it's been a bad relationship, especially the last few years. it's not a lot of trust there from the Bears standpoint, I don't think.
No doubt about it, as reporting is indicating. There's all kinds of land the city could offer or broker a deal with. There's the Southworks site. There's the 78, just to name a few. So the mayor said, well, if the Bears are going to go, we could just get another NFL team here. Is that a realistic possibility? Maybe that's your answer right there.
Mine. Yeah, not in our lifetimes, Paris. Not if we're a renovated Soldier Field, that's for sure. So I know that's not going to happen. The NFL and the owners are very happy with 32 teams. It's a perfect number for the competitive balance. Also, they'd only consider expansion, and they don't really want to, if there'd be some big bump in broadcast revenues, and that's not going to happen unless it's a foreign team and you get more international revenue in. And as far as teams relocating, teams don't relocate from where they are into a 100-year-old stadium with, a roof that was tacked onto it. That's just not what happens. When teams relocate, it's to go to a new building, and typically one that's got meaningful public sector contribution towards it. And that doesn't seem to be on the table either. So another NFL team backfilling into Soldier Field is not likely to occur.
At the same time, you put a roof on Soldier Field, you make it useful the entire year round. Does that perhaps increase the economic impact here?
Marginally, but certainly not enough to offset $2 billion of costs, that's for sure. We just have to recognize Soldier Field has been a very useful facility for a very long time. Now, if we want to get a new stadium in Chicago, we want to have the kind of multi-purpose facility that will help conventions come to town, help major sporting events, maybe bring in Final Fours, things like that. You have to start from scratch. There was a plan like this, Paris, some years ago. Governor Edgar, I know we're talking ancient history here. Governor Edgar proposed something that was euphemistically called McDome. It would have been a domed stadium. Yeah, you remember? That made a lot of sense to everyone except the political division of the spoils. Governor Edgar wanted to be under the McDome Authority. The mayor wanted it, the previous mayor wanted it to be under the Park District. And as a result, it never got built. But that was the plan that made sense. That would have, and we would have now just been talking about a renovation of that stadium, not the Bears moving to Arlington Heights to a brand new stadium or $2.2 billion to be thrown to a retrofit of a 100-year-old building.
Well, the politics here have historically been as dysfunctional as the product that the Bears have put on the field over the last 10, 15 years or so. All right, Mark Gannis, always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ferris. My pleasure.
The next city council elected in 2023 will look a lot different than the current one. That's because many alderpeople are headed to the exits. Alderman Michael Scott Jr. stepped away in June. Alderman Roderick Sawyer and Ray Lopez are running for mayor instead, and a third, Alderwoman Sophia King, is considering a run for mayor. Some are dealing with legal issues. Alderman Kerry Austin has been indicted for taking bribes and is not running again. Alderman Howard Brookins is waiting for an ethics board ruling on conflicts posed by his law practice before deciding whether to seek re-election after losing a judicial race. And Patrick Daley Thompson was convicted of tax evasion and forced to resign. And 4 additional city council members who recently announced their exit plans are joining us right now. They are Alderwoman Michelle Smith of the 43rd Ward on the north side. She's resigning her seat on city council on August 12th. Alderman Harry Osterman of the 48th Ward in Andersonville and Edgewater. He is also not seeking re-election. Alderman George Cardenas of the 12th Ward on the southwest side. He won a seat on the Board of Review and is stepping down in December. And Alderman James Kappelman of the 46th Ward in Uptown. He is not seeking re-election. Welcome all of you back here to Chicago tonight, perhaps for the final time, at least in your current roles. Alderman Osterman, I'll start with you. You're in your 3rd term. It's been a relatively safe seat for you. Why hang it up now?
So it's, it's a very difficult decision because I'm born and raised in this community. But I think looking back and reflecting, I spent 11 years as state representative and 12 years as alderman, really working really hard to improve my neighborhood, working with my neighbors. And for me at this time, it was a time to kind of reflect and look to transition to something else. So I'm going to finish my term. I've got work to do for the next 10 months, and then we'll see what comes after that.
Alderman Cardenas, you won a seat on the Cook County Board of Review. You'll be taking up that post in December. Why did you want to change jobs?
Well, I saw an opportunity, obviously, that I wanted to represent a broader base and I wanted to put my skills to use. I'm an accountant, a data analyst, a consultant, and it was my passion. I just wanted to see that through, and I think that opportunity presents. I'm going to use those skill sets to be able to help folks out in a bigger way.
Alderman Smith, you said you're leaving to care for an ailing family member. Although the timing does give Mayor Lightfoot the opportunity to pick a replacement about 7 months before the election, why not wait 7 months to give voters that choice?
You know, the voters will certainly have a choice. In my ward, we are active participants in whether or not the mayor appoints somebody. I'm sure there's going to be a contested election. But I'm the youngest member of my family at 67. I have aging relatives and friends for whom I have responsibilities. And under those circumstances, I really just couldn't personally wait 7 months. And I had to say that it was time to leave really a job I love very much.
A job you love, and you've been very instrumental on issues related to ethics, the recent ethics reform package. Alderman Kappelman, you've had some tough re-elections in the past, but you're deciding not to run this time. How come?
You know, I'm one of those people who really things turned around for me when COVID hit. Actually, about a month before we all had to just kind of do everything remotely, I heard some bad news from my physician on a number of different things. I had to have surgery, and then I had 3 major cancer scares. And, you know, there's no cancer. I still have to be monitored for it, but I'll be turning 70 3 months from today. And I thought, you know, this gave me a chance to really review what I want to do. I want more adventures in my life, and I'm not sure what it is yet, but that's part of the fun.
And we certainly wish for your continued health, Alderman. You all have the ability to speak freely now. You're not seeking re-election. One alderperson told me during the height of the pandemic that the job just wasn't fun anymore, that folks weren't having as much fun doing this job as they had in the past. Alderman Osterman, have you experienced that? Is this job just not as much fun as it used to be?
I think it's an incredibly rewarding job, and I think each of us works in our community and we're able to get things done, and I think that's why people run for public office. So I think the ability to help neighbors, the ability to get projects or open new businesses in your community, help schools, that's incredibly fulfilling. So I think it's I think that it's an incredibly rewarding job, and I think fun. It's a challenging job. It's not easy, but I think it's incredibly rewarding when you can help move your community in a positive way.
Fun perhaps isn't the operative here when you're talking about a job with this kind of responsibility. Alderwoman Smith, why do you think so many of your colleagues are leaving right now? I mean, it's no secret that that Mayor Lightfoot has had a controversial governing style. Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, let me say this. First of all, City Council turns over a lot each election. In the 11 years that the 3 of us have been here, it's turned over almost entirely, but not quite. So I think that if you look at the data, there's always a lot of turnover in City Hall. I do think that pandemic did have a lot to do with how difficult the job was during the pandemic. It's wonderful that we are finally getting beyond it. And I've always been a workaholic, and I never worked harder than during the pandemic. And we all had to reflect on our lives and lives of the people that we care about. And I was glad I was here during the pandemic. I hope I helped my community through it calmly and attending to their needs. And I think to a lot of people in public service, the pandemic was really even more difficult than it was for everybody for whom it was difficult.
And certainly you had the pandemic, and then you had the unrest that happened soon after in 2020. Alderman Cardenas, what are your biggest concerns as you leave this post for the city of Chicago?
Well, I mean, obviously it hasn't been easy the last couple of years. I would like to see more civility in the council, more collaboration. I would like to see us getting back to some old habits of getting things done. When I first came into office, I sat down with, at that time, RMD, also known as Richard M. Daley, and he asked me point blank what I wanted to accomplish as an alderman. And we went through a list of things. I said a high school, I said some schools badly needed. We had overcrowding at the time. I needed a library in Little Village and a park, and many infrastructure improvements. And we got all of those things done in the matter of 10 years. When Daley left, I had accomplished pretty much all of them. Little Village Park, in fact, was inaugurated by Emmanuel. So I want to get back to that. I want to get back to getting things done. I hope my colleagues get back to the basics of collaboration with the administration.
I remember the ribbon cutting in that new park in Little Village. Alderman Kappelman, any thoughts on where the city needs to go in solving the public safety issue, which has crept into your ward in Uptown as well?
Sure. I think we know that it's a tough answer, not only in Chicago, but across this country. And we know that we need more police, and we know that police reform is also needed throughout this entire country as well. So the problems we're facing in Chicago are really not that different from what other cities are facing. So, but we do know part of that solution means we must have the police, we must have elected officials, we must have the community all working together to make this area safer. It's not just a job of the police or elected officials or the community. It's all of us working together. And it's very difficult to do that right now with the polarization that exists in this country.
And there will be a lot of new faces on City Council come next year to try to tackle these issues, and that's where we'll have to leave it right now. But we'll be joined again by the alder people later in the program to discuss the pressing issues of the day, like a dome for Soldier Field and much more. But for now, our thanks to alder people Michelle Smith, Harry Osterman, George Cardenas, and James Kappelman. And up next, the Soul Children of Chicago prepare for their upcoming anniversary celebration, so please stay with us.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
There's much more ahead on the program, including Indiana lawmakers on the state's abortion ban efforts. But first, for the last 40 years, Walt Whitman and the Soul Children of Chicago have been traveling the world to share their love of music. Tomorrow, they'll celebrate their 40th anniversary in a special concert in Grant Park, featuring current members and past members of the choir. Arts correspondent Angel Ito stepped in on their rehearsal to get a taste of what to expect.
It's the end of an era of 40 years, going into a whole nother era. And this particular concert in Millennium Park is a first. And to bring all 5 generations of Soul Children back, it's an amazing experience, and to hear them is even greater.
Walt Whitman and the Soul Children of Chicago are taking center stage at the Grant Park Gospel Jubilee as they celebrate 40 years. Made up of current and former choir members, director Walt Whitman says the return of so many familiar faces speaks directly to the choir's sound, something he's been perfecting since he started the group in 1981.
From there, the sound of the Soul Children became what people known as a mature sound from a children's choir. It's a mixture of everything, and the blend is amazing because there's a connection. You can't fabricate that. It's a connection spiritually that binds them together, so that even from the 1981, they don't know the 22 kids, but there's a connection. And that connection is what that produces the sound and the presence that people experience, and they can't explain. You can't articulate it. All you know is, I feel something.
While formerly known as a gospel group,
Soul Children is not a gospel choir in that sense. We're more of a choir that can embrace all music. So we sing Jewish music, we sing in foreign language, we're able to go into different arenas.
Whitman says the root of the work is centered around their love for music.
Purpose is what drives us. So we're not driven by being a recording choir. We're not driven by necessarily even popularity. We're driven by purpose. And so purpose will always keep you going. I can be in front of an atheist, I can be in front of Jewish people, I can be in front of the corporate America, we can be in front of the church. The same response, because the spirit of the thing is what transcends. It's not necessarily just doing the song. It's the spirit behind the song. And so what we do, I teach a lot about how do you translate what you feel to people who don't know.
That translation will also be conveyed through conductor Charles Floyd, who will lead the choir in the Gospel Jubilee.
It's nice to be able to represent the community, represent the Black community, to represent the Christian community. It's just an honor to be able to do that. And I don't think in my entire life, for as long as I've lived here, born and raised here in Chicago, it's taken all of this time for something like this to come to fruition.
Whitman says the performers look forward to helping others through their love of music.
And so with the Soul Children, that's the goal. The goal is to leave a legacy, to change lives, educate, elevate, and enlighten.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Makes me want to sing, clap, snap, dance. You can see Walt Whitman and the Soul Children of Chicago tomorrow from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Gospel Jubilee at the Pritzker Pavilion. Now, Paris, back to you.
Certainly going to be a fun show. All right, thanks, Amanda. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Indiana is the latest of Illinois' neighbors to be a battleground for abortion rights. We hear from some of that state's lawmakers. 4 outgoing older people on whether putting a dome on Soldier Field and hosting NASCAR races are good for Chicago and taxpayers. And the Art Institute's famed Lions recently returned from a routine cleaning, which got us thinking, what is the Lions' history there? We look into it in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. American Airlines pilots picketed downtown earlier today. They claim the company is selling more flights than it has the capacity to serve. Protesters say the overbooking is not only inconveniencing passengers, but also potentially compromising safety.
American Airlines does not have the pilots trained for the tickets that they sold, and they're not living up to that contract. They are pushing pilots to the very maximums allowed by the FAA. They are recklessly utilizing us, and that does two things. It creates unreliable schedules because we time out and flights canceled or are massively delayed. And the other one that's very dear to our hearts is it pushes on the margin of safety in the wrong way. This insanity has got to stop.
Tager says that since June, American has canceled around 8,200 flights, impacting some 1.2 million passengers. An inmate at Cook County Jail has tested positive for monkeypox. The Cook County Sheriff's Office says the individual was immediately isolated and the unit was quarantined and monitored with daily screenings. Health officials say the risk to the jail population and staff is thought to be low. The disease has so far largely been found among men who have sex with other men. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has confirmed almost 3,600 monkeypox cases across the country, including 350 here in Illinois. A 7-week strike by workers that has impacted road construction is finally coming to an end. 300 workers employed by Chicago area quarries went on strike last month, putting a strain on road projects throughout northern Illinois. But today, the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, says members have voted unanimously to accept a contract offer. In a statement, the union says members will receive a more than 16% increase in pay and benefits over the 3-year agreement. And now, Amanda, we toss it right back to you.
Thanks, Paris. Lawmakers in neighboring Indiana are in the middle of a special session for a proposed abortion ban. The measure would ban abortions except in cases of rape, incest, and when the life of the pregnant person is at risk. Lawmakers voted today to make the exemptions more restrictive, such that victims of rape and incest can only get an abortion if the pregnancy is less than 8 weeks, quote, post-fertilization. Victims younger than age 16 could access abortions up to 12 weeks after fertilization. Joining us to talk about this legislation and more are State Senator Shelley Yoder, a Democrat representing Monroe County, Indiana, that does include the city of Bloomington, State Senator and Minority Leader Greg Taylor, that's a Democrat representing parts of Indianapolis, also Peter Breen, Vice President and Senior Counsel for the anti-abortion Thomas More Society. We did reach out to several Republican lawmakers from Indiana. They either did not respond or declined to come on the program. Let's begin with you, Senator Taylor. You're on the committee that added these restrictions, also adding criminal penalties for doctors who do oppose abortions. Now, you voted against them, but it's my understanding that more changes could be coming both in the Senate this week and then later in the House. Are you expecting further changes, and what might that look like?
Yes, I do expect there to be some changes. I don't think those changes are going to be in a direction that I can support, but I do expect some changes definitely in the Senate once we get to second reading, and also when it goes over to the House of Representatives for consideration.
Senator Yoder, any specifics on the changes that you expect could be added? As Senator Taylor noted, likely it seems to further restrict abortions.
Well, what's really unfortunate is today we made a very bad bill worse, and I don't expect any changes that are going to be positive. We didn't hear one testimony from a Hoosier in support of this bill, and now we're just trying to wait and see what other changes are coming. We have no idea. Even today in our committee hearing, we couldn't even get a sense for who was authoring these amendments from our supermajority, the Republicans. And so it's going to be very interesting in the coming days to see what kind of changes we're going to see in a bill that's already very unpopular.
Now, Mr. Breen, you were testifying in Indiana regarding this legislation, and many in the anti-abortion movement have criticized the bill as weak. Do you see it that way, or do the latest amendments passed via committee today make it more palatable to you?
Well, the amendments that came in late today were minor. And what I would say, weak maybe isn't the right word still from the pro-life movement. We would more say it's flawed. There are certain standard, we've got model bills on the pro-life side the same way you would on the pro-choice side, and that language is not reflected in the current bill. So there is, the reason that everybody who testified on this was opposed is because the language, folks on the pro-choice side don't know why are these certain words in there, and the folks on the pro-life side are having the same problem.
Such as what? What do you want in there that is not currently part of the legislation?
Right, a huge glaring error in the drafting was that they redefined the abortions of certain disabled children as not abortions at all. Now, look, you can deal with those abortions, but you don't say they're not actually abortions. Medical professionals would agree no matter what side you're on. And the problem is, throughout Indiana law, a lot of abortion regulation hinges on that definition. So all of a sudden, your conscience rights hinge on that definition. So if that's not an abortion anymore, then what does a Catholic institution that doesn't want to do those procedures, do they have any rights anymore? And they would actually, the bill would make Medicaid cover those procedures. So you'd actually have an expansion of taxpayer-funded abortion in Indiana, which I think is the last thing the folks in the supermajority were looking for when they came down to the Capitol this week. Certainly, their constituents who are on the pro-life side do not want to see an expansion of taxpayer-funded abortion. And so really, they do need to clean up this language to make it clearer what exactly do we want to do, because it's not matching what I'm hearing out of the supermajority, and certainly not what their constituents want to see.
So lots still ahead in terms of the debate in Indiana. But Senator Taylor, you and other legislators did meet with Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday about this measure. What are you seeking from the federal government to assist states where a future with abortion access is not guaranteed?
Well, first of all, we had a great visit from our Vice President and discussions about coalition building in states like Indiana, where we see super majorities in Republican-run legislatures trying to regulate women's health care. And we're going to be doing a coordinated campaign to make sure that all of the people who have problems with these laws have access to the federal government and Department of Justice to kind of regulate what's going on here. I would have to disagree with Mr. Green about some of his discussions today about Medicaid funding, for example, which if Mr. Green was there later, he will see that the supermajority Republican legislature had a fiscal bill that was going to open up the Indiana budget to more funding for programs because they know this is going to lead to more need for Medicaid funding when it comes to births in Indiana.
So things like child care, pregnancy planning, et cetera. And Senator Yoder, what are you hearing from your constituents about this legislation?
I think it needs to be made very clear that the majority of Hoosiers want access to abortion care, over 80%. And so when Mr. Breen showed up and testified in our committee, I mean, it was a level of mansplaining that the women in Indiana have not yet experienced. And so I just want to reiterate that the reason why it didn't have support is because the majority of Hoosiers want access to abortion care. It is health care, and Hoosiers want that access.
Mr. Breen, we have about 1 minute left. I'm going to let you respond to that. And also briefly, when we talk about exemptions for a pregnant person whose life is at risk, how should that be defined? That seems like a somewhat difficult measure to determine.
You know, I'll tell you, Amanda, we've done it in many other states. So Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas all have laws that are actually very well crafted. They're on the books. That's what the people of Indiana voted for. Now, and I have to say, the legislators of Indiana promised pro-life laws, and so that's what they were going to get. Now, as for mansplaining, I mean, we're dealing with male legislators and female speakers throughout the day, and I would urge that the pro-life side had plenty and probably more female than male speakers. But again, in terms of how this bill could be drafted, it needs to be drafted well in accord with the model language and express what the supermajority has promised, which is a pro-life future for the state of Indiana.
And in about 10 seconds, Senator Yoder, is there any possibility that this is not going to come to fruition, particularly given that Democrats do hold super minorities in both chambers of the Indiana legislature?
We do have an excessive majority in the Indiana legislature, and our caucus will be working tirelessly to make sure that we protect women, that we reiterate to Hoosiers that we will stand up and fight for their access to full reproductive health care.
Our thanks to State Senators Shelley Yoder and Greg Taylor, as well as to Peter Breen. Up next, we check back with some of Chicago's outgoing city council members, but first, a look at the weather.
And earlier in the program, we discussed why aldermen are heading to the exits. And now we're joined again by alderpeople Michelle Smith, Harry Osterman, George Cardenas, and James Kappelman. All right, we're going to do kind of like a speed round here of some of these pressing issues, starting with you, Alderman Osterman. NASCAR, a NASCAR race around Grant Park next year. Good idea or bad idea?
Bad idea.
How come?
I think that priorities of events, and I think how we're marketing the city of Chicago, I think NASCAR is not what I would say things that Chicagoans, at least in my community, are asking for. I think especially when we're trying to slow traffic down around the city, pedestrian safety is the number one issue, one of the number one issues I hear from. So NASCAR kind of flies in the face of that.
Alderman Cardenas, good idea, bad idea?
You know, listen, so many other challenges that I would tackle first. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I just think that it would not be my priority at this point to be focusing on the Bears, the Dome, the crime. There's many things that I would tackle first before NASCAR. But you know, again, I'm not sitting in that seat. But I think that certainly some of us want to be supportive but we want to hear about the other pressing matters that the city has.
Alderman Kappelman, does the mayor need to bring in the alder people to sort of negotiate something like this?
You know what? I'm all for this. Let's bring out all the ideas, good, bad, whatever, and let's vet it. I mean, that's part of what our job is, to make sure that good decisions are made. So I'm waiting to hear more information about that.
Alderwoman Smith, good idea, bad idea?
So when I was hired to be alderman, it was to bring economic revitalization back to my community, to improve our schools, and to increase the number of families in the city, and to focus on the treasures that Chicago has, like theater. And in general, I think that those are the things that we should be trumpeting. And we are concerned about pedestrian traffic and safety. So I think that there's a lot that this city has to offer on the basis of its tremendous entertainment districts, its schools, and its people.
All right, Alderman Osterman, dome on Soldier Field that could cost up to $2.2 billion, if not more, because we know these things always incur cost overruns. Is this a good idea, and is it going to happen?
What I would say is that there should be active negotiations with the Bears, and it seems like both sides are kind of talking apart. And I think trying to get them, whether it's at Soldiers Field, Chicago's got a lot of land throughout our city that could potentially build a brand new stadium. So I think we should explore all those options before they go to Arlington Heights.
It seems like a new piece of land for a brand new stadium would be more enticing for the Bears from my point of view here. Alderman Cardenas, the dome over Soldier Field, is this a good thing to spend money on?
I mean, I'm open-minded, but I think, again, priorities. I want to see my field house built. I want to see kids in my parks. I want to see infrastructure improvements throughout. So that, they see the benefits of Chicago thriving. Focusing again downtown is not the end all of all. And again, it would mean that, come see me, come to my neighborhoods and see and address those needs. And I'm all for that, no doubt about it. If progress has to be across the board, I'm not against it, but I definitely want to leverage what I need for my communities before I attend to the needs of somebody else.
Alderman Kappelman, a lot of folks say $2.2 billion could be best spent on some of the other priorities of the city. Is this a good idea?
You know what? My first thought was I'm a little hesitant to spend that amount of money, especially given the other needs. But if it will generate enough revenue to pay for it, and then also pay for other services that the city needs, I'm certainly very open to it.
All right, Alderwoman Smith, looking back, what is your proudest accomplishment in your terms as alderperson?
Well, I think it's three things. First of all, we doubled the number of school-age children in our area and improved our public schools, and we were thrilled to need to, and in fact, build addition to our great elementary schools. Running to keeping people and the families is why I ran for alderman. That's the key to turning the city around. Improving our local economic infrastructure. We turned around some of our shopping areas that had really fallen because of bad investments in the 2000s. And I'm also really, really proud of the work we did to create a more ethical city council, and in fact, have the strongest lobbying ban in the state of Illinois, if not in the country.
Alderman Osterman, how about you, looking back on some of your accomplishments? What is the thing that stands out the most?
So a lot of great progress. Our community is a safer community with better schools, hundreds of new businesses. The CTA is building a $2 billion project that's going to transform our neighborhood. But the core for me, I think, is how me and my staff worked in collaboration with the neighbors and block clubs and chambers to really move our community forward in a positive way. So I think it's the relationships over the period of time with neighbors really making a neighborhood a better place.
Alderman Cardenas, your proudest achievement?
God, schools, modern schools for Chicago. We did a bond of about $500 million. In my community, got about $200 million, if you can believe that. A high school, 2 elementary schools, and then we got obviously a firehouse and a library as well, and a park. I mean, we got a lot of things done in the last 20 years. Obviously, we need to do more, but those things are going to be a testament in our legacy, I think.
Alderman Kappelman, how about you?
I am so proud that Uptown has just turned the corner. It is really now become a community where anyone, especially a young mom with a 3-year-old, can walk down any street and feel safe. So I'm very proud of that. And as a gay man, I was elated that we're able to pass an ordinance that required businesses to offer bathroom facilities to members of the trans community.
All right. Well, as we mentioned, this might be the last time that you appear with us in this forum, and at least in these roles. So all the best in your future endeavors, and our thanks to alderpeople Michelle Smith, Harry Osterman, George Cardenas, and James Kappelman. And up next, Phil Ponce and Jeffrey Baer on the history of one of Chicago's most prominent pieces of art in an encore edition of Ask Jeffrey. So please stay with us.
Ask Jeffrey is brought to you in part by BMO Harris Bank.
Okay. Can you get this? I don't have my wallet. Oh, really? It's funny how that always happens. Yeah, it's fine.
With BMO Harris, you don't need your wallet. You can get money from any BMO ATM using your phone.
Uh-oh, looks like someone can buy their own tacos. Okay.
You could also pay them back with Zelle.
So many ways for you to pay. You know what? I'm not hungry. I'll just have some of yours.
Order for BMO.
Ooh, tacos, banking. Some things are made to be mobile.
That feeling you get when your phone is your wallet. That's the BMO effect.
From the Picasso statue to the Bean to the city's countless murals, public art is a vibrant part of Chicago's cultural landscape. But for over a century, Chicagoans have taken a special pride in a pair of sculptures watching over Michigan Avenue. Here to tell us more is Jeffrey Baer in this week's edition of Ask Jeffrey. Hey, Jeffrey, this is, you know what? This is always a good one to go to because we've all seen them. And the question is, what is the history of the Lions outside of the Art Institute?
Yes, the Lions, they are like old familiar friends, aren't they? As you've said, we've passed them all. We've all passed them 100 times, and yet we don't really know the story behind them. So here we go. Like so many things in Chicago, the history of the Lions can be traced back to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, the Great World's Fair. So what you might not know is that the original section of the Art Institute building itself, which the Lions Guard, was also built for the World's Fair. It was the only structure outside of Jackson Park and one of just a few that weren't demolished shortly after the fair ended. The building opened in 1893, but for almost a year, take a look, Phil, its front doors were unguarded. Isn't that funny? No lions in that picture.
It's like a mustache is missing.
Yeah, the lions weren't installed until May 1894. They were designed by a sculptor who was then a Chicagoan, Edward Kemys.
And how did Kemys land such a big commission?
Well, Kemys was, in the 1800s, he was considered the country's premier animalier. Look at that bohemian-looking fellow there. He was an animalier, a fancy French word for sculptor of animals. Like many American artists at the time, Kemys was drawn to scenes of raw, unfiltered nature. So you can see that in some of his smaller pieces that we're going to show here. The Art Institute actually hosted an exhibition of his work in 1885, which was at their previous location. So this is before the fair. It was a few blocks south at Michigan and Van Buren. Kemys ended up creating a dozen sculptures for the World's Fair in 1893, more than any American. And like much of the exposition's White City, they were actually made of plaster, and they were not meant to last. And that included the two lions. It also included two other sculptures that Chicagoans may recognize. These two bison, which stand in Humboldt Park, just north of Division Street.
So how did temporary plaster lions that he created become permanent bronze ones?
Well, so after the fair closed, an early benefactor of the Art Institute, whose name was Florence Lathrop Page, commissioned bronze casts of these designs. Page, by the way, was a sister-in-law of Marshall Fields, very much in Chicago society. And since then, of course, these lions have become icons. Each of the lions weighs over 2 tons, and if you look closely, you'll realize they are not identical twins, which is another thing people maybe just walk right by. Kemys wanted them to have their own personality and style. He titled the Northern Lion On the Prowl, with its mouth slightly open there, gazing into the distance. Contrast that with the courage or maybe the hubris of the Southern Lion, which is shown in, quote, an attitude of defiance. You can see that coming through in his body language. Notice the upturned, regal head. you wouldn't want to mess with either of these lions.
I don't think so. You know, I see a lot of people reading books on the steps because they like to read between the lions.
Yes.
Anyway, over the years, the lions have become more than just statues. They're almost the city's mascots, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that sort of regal stoicism, stoic realism that Kemmy's was going for in his designs have been greeted with a certain amount of playfulness. Going back decades, you can see that in the way they're shown on the cover of the Chicagoan magazine in 1928. More recently, of course, the Lions have become diehard Chicago sports fans. Whenever a local team has a strong postseason, they don Blackhawks or Bears helmets, or Cubs or Sox hats, alas, maybe next year. Anyway, there's also the ceremonial wreathing of the Lions every year, accompanied by a holiday-themed performance. And I didn't know this. Today, the Lions actually have their own Twitter account. They post semi-regularly, mostly about local sports and other bits of local culture, such as talking about the only proper way to make a Chicago hot dog, which, you know, a wild carnivore probably should know.
Well, I'm glad the Lions are staying current, keeping up with the times.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So are you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And you can find more on Chicago's beloved Art Institute Lions on our website. And while you're there, make sure to submit your question to Jeffrey Baird. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
You can search high and low. Doesn't really matter where you go. You won't ever find nobody like the Lord. Doesn't matter where you go. You won't ever find.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices.